Africa and down, especially down the Nile, the valley of the Nile. And that concentration is due to that's the area where man's civilization started. Even there was no Sumeria yet. There was no Babylonia or anything like that. The Chinese had not produced a single book yet. And those people, the ancient Egyptians themselves, the ancient Africans, stated in the Papyrus of Hunefer, and I quote, "We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God, Hapi, H-A-P-I, dwells, at the foothill of the mountain of the moon," unquote. The beginning of the Nile is two places. You got Uganda, the Blue Nile, Ethiopia, Uganda, the White Nile, Ethiopia, the Blue Nile. The mountain of the moon, you have two in Africa. One is called Kilimanjaro, between Kenya and Tanganyika, and the other one is called Rwenzori. And the Twa and the Hutu, the small people, which people call pygmy, ugly term, those people you can find even in South Africa today as the Kalahari and the Kalahari and the Khoikhoi. The European willfully distort the name and call them Hottentots and some other name has been. But you can find those people in Egyptian history also as the Sibenetos and the Sinabs. They were the only people that brought down even a symbol today, the Ankh, which Christians are now using in America, and by the time Tatankan exhibit come here and don't know they are using what they once called a pagan object.
Third dynasty encounter of the king Nasut-Neterkhet, who we know now as Zoser, and his chief lector priest, the famous Imhotep. In letters beginning in February 1889, Egyptologist Charles Wilbur stumbled on the Stele of Famine on glyphs of a huge boulder likely written in the Meta-Neter. Wilbur came across the name of a king he called Karsha. And at the time, the name of Karsha, which we would eventually know is Zoser, could not be deciphered. The king was unknown to the European world. More importantly, the king was in his 18th year of reign. Though the stele was suspected to be written during the time of the Ptolemies, this clue is incredibly important because the king mentioned could not be a Ptolemy, because no Ptolemy was in his 18th year of rule. And certainly there was no mention of a lack of flooding of the Nile during the reign of the Ptolemies. The lack of flooding during the reign of Ptolemies, the event itself would have been devastating to the economy of the Ptolemies and would have been reported. So we know, even though written during the time of the Ptolemies, this story has a much earlier date. Because of the mention of a 7-year famine, the European world was excited, for the stele seemed to confirm the story of Joseph as he spoke of the 7-year famine in the Bible. In the stele, for the first time, the king, who was first called Karsha, was linked directly to the king of an earlier period, the 3rd dynasty step pyramid builder, King Neterkhet. More excitingly, later in the passage, we will see a first-person conversation between Neterkhet and the deified scientist architect Imhotep. Since Wilbur, the stele has been translated to various successes by Brox, 1891, Klett, 1891, Morgan, 1894, Seth, 1901, Barquette, 1953, Miriam Litcham, 1973, and it is also included in the Literature of Ancient Egypt, edited by William Kelly Simpson, 2003, published by Yale. The story of Yepo in one document solves several important issues of African primacy. First, it points to an ancestral memory written in the Souls of Re, or the Ba Re, of where the Nile Valley Africans source where they came from in the voice of the famous king Neterket, King Zoser. Second, it gives a first-person account of the king Neterket and Imhotep discussing our educational system or mystery system, the Ankh or Per-Ankh. Third, it is most likely the world's oldest account of God and man interacting, and it is, or seems to be, an original source of several biblical stories, including the Adam and Eve story, the Abraham story, the Joseph story, and the Moses story. In this case, the God that they are speaking about is Khnum. He is a form of the one God that made intelligent life from inert materials on his potter's wheel, such as God creating man and woman in the beginning during Genesis. Fourth, we find in the Stele Dr. Ben's famous quote, which has become controversial. We come from the mountains of the moon where God Hapi dwelt. Controversial because Dr. Ben sourced it to the Hunefer papyrus. But it is my belief that this quote is sourced not to the Hunefer papyrus, but can be found in the Stele of Edfu. In short, the Famine Stele is a treasure for African people throughout the world and should sit at the first step in a foothill of all of our teachings in the academia, our educational institutions, our religious institutions, and in our homes, as the basis for our restoration and reconstruction of Mat. Among the treasures of the Famine Stele, or the Stele of Edfu, there is an important line which, if read fast, we missed more than 20,000 years of Nile Valley civilization, which includes the time to our present time of Africa, the 5,000 years of Egyptian or Kemetic civilization, and the time of the earliest civilizations marching their way to Kemet from up south. What I'm going to present to you is a primary text that ends the discussion about the beginnings of the Nile Valley African, finally. Here's the glyphs, transliterations, and translations. The translation is Merriam-Webster's from one version of ancient literature. King Neterket is speaking. And you can see it in the glyph if you follow it, if you can read partial meta-neter or the transliterations, and you can check it. It correlates to almost all of the translations of this particular piece. King Neterket says, "He departed, he returned to me quickly. He let me know the flow of Hapi, his shores and all the things that they contain. He disclosed to me the hidden wonders to which the ancestors had made their way, and no king has equaled them since." Let me read the passage again. He departed, he returned to me quickly, he let me know the flow of Hapi, his shores and all the things they contain. He disclosed to me the hidden wonders to which the ancestors had made their way, and no king had equaled them since. This one line in meta-neter is one of the most important historical statements of all of Africa. This line, rewritten from the 3rd dynasty by the Ptolemies, is a part of a conversation between the famous and deified architect Imhotep and his king Neterket, Zoser. This statement is primary proof that the Nile Valley Africans knew that their ancestors came from up south where the Nile began, and the Nile is sometimes called by the name of the neter, Hapi. This one line has no equal in all of the ancient literature speaking about the source of the Nile. It is incredible because the world knows of Imhotep, who was a pyramid architect and builder. And he was scientific and also a priest, but a genius, and is an authoritative source. And it is he who is talking or telling the Norsut or King Neterket about the source of the Nile. Here's a section that precedes this where the conversation began concerning the famine and the Nile not inundated, which I will cover later in the formal presentation. I directed my heart to turn to the past. I consulted one of the staff of the Ibis, the chief lector priest Imhotep, son of Ptah, south of his wall, and I asked, in which place was Hapi born? Which is the town of the Cineous one? Which god dwells there, that he might join with me? And if you can look at the glyphs, you could see the hieroglyphs for Miss Hapi, begetting from Hapi, begetting, or where does the Nile come from? And you see the famous name of Imhotep. You can, and that you could see also, you can also see the Ibis for the staff of the Ibis. Further, it says, here are the glyphs for this passage. He stood, I shall go to the mansion of the net. It is designed to support a man and his deeds. I shall enter the house of life. Unrolls the souls of Ray. I shall be guided by this. We look at the glyphs, and of course we can see the shrine of Tahuti, and you see the cow's head above it. You can see that is the sacred shrine of Tahuti, found most likely Hermopolis. You can see the temple, and then you can see the Ankh. So you see the temple, and then you see like the parent Ankh, or Ankh surrounded by two temples. And then you can see the Ba Ray. So you can see the bird, which is the soul, and then you can say Ray after that. And then it says, I shall be guided by them. This is beautiful and important. We see a chief priest, Imhotep, being summoned by his king to find an answer from the past about the 7-year famine, and then see the priest go into the sacred temple, the shrine of Tahuti, called the Mansion of the Net. The sacred shrine is most likely in Kimenu or Hermopolis, and then go into the mystery system or the educational system, the Hawat Ankh, and consult the souls of Ray, the text, the scrolls, the books, the library, and gets his answer about earlier Kemet, and says that he will be guided by them. What should be immediately important is that the souls of Ray was information affecting Ta-Neter, the divine land, from an earlier period. This is what Neterket or Zoser sent Imhotep to get and consult. Again, these sections are the direct words of our ancestors in the Stele of Edfu, and our European historical counterparts have no other literature that can challenge this autobiographical conversation between the king Norsut Neterket, also known as Zoser, and his chief priest Imhotep. As I've said last year in other places, the human born in Africa is not a race of humanity, but the species of humanity itself. The human born in Africa is a prototype of humanity, and those groups of humans deriving themselves during and after the Worm-Reese Ice Age, or the races of humanity. The people born in Africa have primacy. They were the first to be created, the first to speak, the first to create language, and the first to read and write. They are the mothers and fathers of us all. In closing, the full presentation will discuss several things. First, it points to the ancestral memory written in the souls of Ray of where the Nile Valley African source, where they came from, which I have showed you. Second, it gives a first-person account of the king Neterket and Imhotep discussing our educational system or mystery system, the Hawa, Ankh, or Per-Ankh. Third, it is most likely the oldest written account of God and man interacting, and is most likely the original source of several biblical stories, including the Adam and Eve, the Abraham, the Joseph story, and the Moses story. Fourth, we will hopefully get to examine Dr. Ben's famous and controversial quote, "We come from the mountains of the moon where God Hapi dwelt," and show that it is sourced to this document and not the Hunefer papyrus, ending the controversial or the controversy of his statement, and showing that in fact that he was right and that the Africans did say that. The Famine Stele is a treasure for African people throughout the world and should sit as a first step on a foothill of all of our teachings in the academia, our educational institutions, our religious institutions, and in our homes, because it solves the question, where did the Nile Valley Africans say they came from? Further, it is the basis of our restoration and reconstruction of Mott. Oh, I almost forgot. At the conference, I will show you an ancient African civilization at least 12,000 years older than ancient Kemet, which answers the question, where did the Nile Valley Africans actually come from?
Hi, I'm Jenny Taylor Martin, a director here at Edgar Cayce's ARE. Today I'll be speaking with John Van Auken, the author of numerous books, including his latest, Edgar Cayce's Tales of Egypt. Hi, John. It's nice to have you with us today.
It's good to be here.
John, how did you come to be an expert on the Cayce readings on Egypt?
Well, it first began with a dream, and then that followed up with a meditation experience in which the imagery and the content was about ancient Egypt. And so that stimulated me to go research ancient Egypt and the Cayce readings on Egypt. And then eventually I was fortunate enough to tour Egypt and learn a lot more. And that led to me gathering the material and writing the first book.
How many tours of Egypt have you been on?
I think I'm approaching 34 times. This April will probably be the 34th tour of Egypt. Hard to believe.
This is your second major book on Egypt. What motivated you to write this one?
Actually, the stories in the Cayce readings. The fascinating way he told the tales of people's lives in ancient Egypt, I felt needed to be shared. And so I gathered those stories, and they meant a great deal to me, so I wrote about them, and that's what sparked this book.
Can you give us an example of one of those stories?
I guess the most fascinating tale that Cayce tells is